it's World Backup Day, or pretty much. And at these dark times, you should make sure you have a backup. Not for you, if for those that come after you. A lot of people are familiar with the 3-2-1 backup rule. 3 copies of the data in 2 formats with at least one of those off-site. And for me, well, I prefer to have an appliance that's storing my stuff and sort of managing backups. But there are a lot of people that will just copy their important data to Google Drive or OneDrive or some other cloud service. But most cloud services will charge you a lot of money once you move beyond storing a trivial amount of information. I mean, the temptation from Google is like, oh, just upload everything. Don't worry about trying to organize it and figure out what's important and what you should pay monthly storage fees for and what you can move on to an external hard drive. Just pay for an upgrade. It's so inexpensive. And then your data can be mined because it's just you, me, and Google that can read your Google Drive. I mean, that doesn't set well with me. So I like having storage local. I like having the important stuff local. I like separating concerns so that my Star Trek movie and TV episode collection is treated a little differently than personal documents or legal documents or like old photos or like school information, like the photos and school trip stuff and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's deeds and you accumulate a lot of documentation as you get older, and it's like, okay, I should probably have this stuff fairly easy to access, but not super buried and not completely offline, let's say. So you can sort of pick and choose that, but it's nice to have a home server for that. And if you don't want to go through setting up a home server, well, a Synology NAS can do that. So today's video is going to be about using a Synology NAS to store your most important stuff and do backups, and sort of the flexibility, the value proposition that it gives you. Because I think it's actually a good value proposition for not a lot more than just the hardware, the hard drives, and what it would cost you to build a machine. You can basically buy a ready-made appliance to do it for you that's got a pretty slick point-and-click interface. Slick point-and-click. See what I did there? This video is also sponsored by Synology, but I'm going to show you some cool stuff, including some lore, some hard-won lore. This is, one of the nuggets of experience that is just really awesome, and I'm going to show it to you. And for everybody that understands it already without having to do it, you're going to probably chime in the comments or come on the Level 1 forums and be like, holy crap, this is, I knew all of these individual things did this, but I had no idea. And it's a really cool way to use Rsync to back up servers, but while also minimizing the attack surface area. And that's going to apply to everything, not just Synology. You can definitely do it with Synology, but you can also do it with other stuff. Even if you want to build your own NAS out of a Raspberry Pi, you could totally do that, or you could, go the easy button and just do it with Synology. One thing that worries me about the cloud-based backup is that it doesn't really follow the 3-2-1 rule if that's all you have, because there was that time where if you were watching a particular Markiplier stream and you were typing in the chat, the algorithm decided that you were a bot and just banned you. And so that was a YouTube stream, but it banned you from all Google services. So you lost access to Gmail and your Google Drive and YouTube and every other Google service that your Google account was tied to. Like, you completely lost your Google account. That really would suck a lot. So you need, that's the 3-2-1. That's the one, maybe, in the 3-2-1 backup rule. Although technically, G Drive, that is an offsite backup, but something can go horribly wrong and you could lose access to G Drive. So opening that can of worms, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Let's not actually do that, because I don't think that's really good. Although we can turn it around, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute. I just think that it's, it's one thing if it's my Star Trek movie collection, if I lost access to that while Google was sorting its crap out, it's like, okay. But all my other stuff, I would be like on edge and be like, screaming and spitting fire and stuff. So you don't really have to worry about those kinds of things when you are confident in your own solution. And the solutions that I'm most confident in are based on Linux or FreeBSD. Not so much Windows. I mean, you can, if your digital existence can be managed by just copying some files somewhere, okay. But there's things like bit rot can creep in. So it's like I've got all these you know, photos from spring break when I was in college, and it was like this, you know, amazing and magical trip, let's say. Not really, I'm sort of embellishing here. But, you know, if some corruption shows up in those files, you don't necessarily know right away unless you've got a product that is actually monitoring for that kind of thing. File systems like ZFS do that. You can do that with the hyper backup, because it's like, hey, this file, the date didn't change. This is changed. So there are options for sort of dealing with that at a software level. It's just by default, most things don't do that. Most things don't look for bit rot. And so when I say I trust Linux, well, the Synology has a nice soft Linux underbelly. So it's Synology, but they've built their product on top of the Linux kernel and a lot of Linux utilities. So all of the stuff that I expect to be there and work correctly is there and works correctly because of the Linux underbelly. The problem comes in backing up the system from the internet. The options are allow an incoming connection with full access to the machine, or have the remote machine make an outgoing connection to a secure account on a local device, like the Synology NAS, for example, or another Linux box where it can dump its backup. So I've got a server out on the internet, and I can allow somebody, it can allow the backup appliance to connect with, you know, like full root privileges to the server. So if you've got several machines and somebody compromises the backup appliance, that's bad. Or I can let the backup process run with full system privileges on that machine out on the internet, and then connect to a limited account, a sandboxed account, on a storage device for backup. And so I generally like the latter option if I can possibly help it. And that's what we're going to go through in setting up on the Synology today. And this would apply, you know, pretty much on a Raspberry Pi all the way through anything. Although hyper backup and some of those utilities that you have with the nice point-and-click GUI, they're not going to be there on a Raspberry Pi. You got to sort of do it yourself if you're going to go the Raspberry Pi route, or like FreeNAS. FreeNAS is another good option for DIY, but Synology wins on ease of use, I think. User interface, the plugin system, you got to try it. The other thing I like to think about is like failure modes. So we've got that server out on the internet, and let's say something really bad happens to it and it crashes horribly and all the files are corrupted and deleted, but it crashes horribly and the backup is still running. You'd be surprised how often something like this happens. So the backup runs and it copies all of the terrible files and overwrites all of the files that are stored on the remote storage device. So we've got an internet server, it's going to connect back to our Synology, and it's just filled with garbage files because it's lost its marbles and it has no idea, and somehow the backup process is still running. That actually happens a lot. Like, that's a common failure mode. Then all of the stuff that it copied is going to overwrite all of the good stuff. Oh no. But wait, if you're using snapshots on the Synology or with like ZFS or something like that, then you can maintain a week or a month or whatever worth of snapshots, point in time snapshots. So if you don't notice it for a few days, you could go a few days back in time. So even though it's copied the whole system full of bad files, you can say, well, just throw all of that out. Let's go back to 2 days ago and look at those files. The Synology gives you a really slick GUI for browsing those so that you can just point and click individual files, and it supports, you know, ext, Linux file systems, and NTFS, Windows for your individual machines that you're backing up, as well as your virtual machines. So you get a lot of flexibility there. But you can look at those corruptions and say, okay, yeah, this file changed and it should not have changed. That machine's just wipe and reload. We're back to the wipe and reload scenario. But you've got, you know, that sort of failure mode covered in your mind when you're thinking through, okay, you know, if somebody gets into the systems, like I'm running a WordPress blog, and you know, WordPress is just dangerously insecure, and somebody manages to get in WordPress because it's WordPress, and they delete all of the content and the backup runs. You know, maybe that was intentional, or maybe they're trying to do something bad to the backup systems. Like they got access to WordPress, can they move laterally into the backup system? And so you have to sort of take steps to harden that and cover that use case. It's a little different when you're using the backup options for backing up an individual machine. So like with the active backup stuff in Synology, you can just install the client on a Windows machine and it's going to back up. And then the Synology still, it doesn't give the Windows machine full access. If really malicious software gets on the Windows machine and it waits for, you know, you to make a bad backup, or it lies to the backup software and says, okay, you've made the backup, all the files are good, the files aren't actually good, it's trying to ransomware you, and so it doesn't want you to have backups. the Windows machine doesn't actually have enough access to the Synology to overwrite those previous snapshots. Like, it will mess up last night's backup for sure, but night before last, which is still maintained on the Synology, you still have access to. So in much the same way where you've got systems connecting, you want to sort of harden that if you're going to take the DIY approach to back up a machine out on the internet. And if you can't use the built-in utilities on the Synology, then Rsync is my go-to for backing up files. But Rsync can also be hardened, especially when you're running it through an SSH connection. So there's a how-to on the forum that sort of talks a little bit more about that. I'm assuming that you're basically able to point and click your way through the GUI, and if you decide to go off the reservation a little bit, there's a guide on the Level 1 forum that will show you how to do the Rsync thing. So what it is it's a Perl script. Stick with me here. It's a good thing. It's a Perl script that locks down Rsync. So Rsync basically can only operate inside a folder. You can still do full machine root privileges. It can restore the permissions and the extended attributes and everything, but it makes it so that your Rsync command can only run with a limited set of options. So I know what you're thinking. It's like, okay, we're going to set up SSH. We're going to have a saved key so the remote machine can connect passwordlessly to the local Synology. They're going to be able to run other SSH commands. And by default, yes, if you've got the key authentication set up, which is off by default on the Synology, there's a how-to for that on the forum as well. And you'll have to go through some steps to enable that and set up home directories, that kind of thing. But if you do that, then and you enable the key-based authentication, the keys are much more secure than a password. Even if you save a password in the remote system, if somebody gets a hold of that password, they would be able to connect to your backup and run arbitrary commands. Well, SSH, Secure Shell, they thought of that in like 1573 when this thing was designed. So with Secure Shell, you can say this key is only allowed to run this command. There's an example of that syntax. It's when you add that SSH key to your authorized keys file with that format, then you will only be able to run the one command that basically receives backup files into a specific folder that is actually in your SSH configuration. So much like the Hyper Backup software client on Windows is kind of locked down in that the Windows client can't delete previous snapshots, this is the same type of lockdown for Rsync. So even though you're going off the reservation a little bit and allowing SSH access to your backup appliance, that key that's associated with that user on the system can only run very, very limited commands, or in this case, one command. And that is the only change that they're allowed to make on the system. And then, of course, that user on the Synology is a limited user. It's not an administrative user. It's not allowed to log into the web GUI. It's literally only allowed to log in and access the one folder. So you just step by step through the GUI to do that, and you're good to go. And this technique for SSH lockdown, it works on pretty much any machine with SSH. It doesn't even matter if it's Linux. You can also do this on FreeNAS or FreeBSD or literally anything else. This is a great way to allow a remote system to back up to a local system with SSH keys in a reasonably safe way. I've thrown a lot at you, so let's summarize. Backing up PCs and VMs, that's active backup, and that works even with the free version of VMware. You can go back in time and restore from certain days, there's snapshot capabilities, etc., etc. But in that 3-2-1 backup plan, you have to back up the NAS itself. So the first sort of backup-ish mechanism is snapshots. Now, snapshots are not a true backup of the NAS, but snapshots allow you to restore files on the NAS from a certain point in time. So that whole corrupt backup scenario where you've made a backup, but the backup is actually bad, snapshots will help you recover, and especially recover if you don't notice in time, because usually you maintain a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months or whatever your space requirements are of snapshots. Then there's hyper backup, which augments active backup by allowing you to back up the entire NAS somewhere else. And then of course Rsync, which I've been talking about, which allows you to copy from literally any source, any Linux source, Raspberry Pis, your Internet of Things devices configuration, whatever you want to do, machines on the internet, safely, the way that I showed you. It's a very, very safe way that I showed you how to use Rsync. You can copy those from the source device directly to the Synology. And then when you have things like hyper backup on top of that, then you get your, tertiary copy that's off-site, the one in the 3-2-1 backup. In other words, it's a lot to throw at you. There's a lot to unpack there, but you know, this is the best strategy for managing your very important files. So now I've got my sort of oddball use cases covered. You know, at home I've got a half a dozen real physical machines, and then like 5 or 6 virtual machines that are doing different things, and then I've got some machines out on the internet, machines like the Level 1 forum itself, all this stuff, and I want to be able to sort of back it up and handle it on one appliance or have one physical device that's managing that. Well, the Synology addresses that. We've got active backup for all of the completely ordinary and pedestrian things with a really slick GUI, and for anything that the really slick GUI doesn't handle, then I can do things from the command line. If I wanted to, if I were running, say, a VMware virtual machine out in the cloud, active backup integrates with VMware. So I can actually log into VMware and back up appliances directly from VMware. If I were running VMware at home, even the free version, now the free version, a lot of people start with the free version of VMware and they're really excited, and then they go to do a backup and it's like, oh, the backup is really hobbled in the free version. It doesn't support a lot of stuff, and it tries to make you do a full export of the VM every time. Well, the Synology software integrates with VMware. It's VMware aware, but you will have to enable SSH on the free version of VMware. But in much the same way, it will be able to pull backups from VMware, even the free version, competently and that work well. So that is a big deal. A lot of people run VMware ESXi, the free version, at home or in their small business, and this will work really well. So yeah, I mean, my home setup is more complicated than, you know, even like a 15 or 20 person office, just because of the number of physical machines and the number of, you know, virtual machines and all of the duties and stuff that those different machines are doing. But you know, one of these with a bunch of 10 or 12 terabyte hard drives, it can store copy upon copy upon copy upon copy of all of the other devices. If you want to learn more about active backup, I did a whole separate video on active backup. You should check that out. But this is, you know, sort of the whole enchilada, because this is World Backup Day. And this is sort of the strategy, the mindset that you need to get in to be able to do these kinds of things. So yeah, snapshotting an entire machine, or you know, it's like the other people, you know, if in your family you have, you know, like your kid's laptop, and then you got your work laptop and some other laptops, and you need to back all those up, but you also need to be sure that, you know, when your kids are going to restore a file they accidentally deleted, they can't get into your work stuff. That's all handled. That's all handled really well. I've got everything on the Synology. You know, I've got my VM, and I've got my physical machines, and I've got my oddball internet machines out there doing the Rsync. Heck, I could even be backing up my IoT Raspberry Pis with that Rsync command. But it would be nice if I could replicate that. So in case there's a fire or tornado or something, that the information that's stored locally on the Synology is also available somewhere else. So you can replicate that. You can just pick up another Synology. If you have, you know, a bunker in your vacation home, you can just, you know, set up another Synology there, and as long as the internet connection, the Synology will replicate to the other Synology. There's no monthly fees. The Synology will also back up to like Amazon S3 and Glacier, but all of those services are fantastically expensive. Synology has their own online backup service, which is pretty good, C2, and that will also be optionally encrypted. So we were talking about, you know, Google can look at your documents and do your stuff. You pick a password, you set a password, and then that password is used to generate an encryption key, and Synology doesn't have that password. So if you lose that password, you can't get your backups back. That's kind of how Amazon Glacier works as well. You set up a key, and then you need to take steps to store that key on a couple of different USB flash drives, maybe put one in the bank vault, something like that. So if you do the encryption option, make sure if something happens to you, especially in these dark times, that the people that come after you that need to get your stuff back, that you've got a way to actually decrypt it. So the Synology online service works pretty well, but you don't have to use it. You could set up your own Synology somewhere else. You could set up your own Synology in the data center. You could set up something on Linode and back it up there, but I got news for you. Linode's going to be a lot more expensive for a VM that's just used for that kind of stuff than something else. Although Linode has that new object storage, I gotta check that out. That might be a thing. But I think that I would generally recommend just stick with the Synology stuff. It's pretty easy. It's pretty point and click. If you want to go off the reservation like I did with the whole Rsync file lockdown Perl script thing, which dates from even before 2004, check out the forum link on Level 1. It's really awesome. I mean, it's a piece of internet lore that is basically forgotten, but you've strung together SSH and Rsync and, you know, Linux Synology, and you've really put together something beautiful from 3 relatively simple components. Like, I'm betting a lot of you knew that, you know, with SSH, you can lock it down so that you can only run certain commands, or in our case, just one command. And some of you knew about Rsync, and some of you knew about the whole offsite backup thing, but see, we've sort of combined these things in a creative way, and now we've got a really amazing backup appliance on top of an already really amazing backup appliance. And it is World Backup Day, so you should back up your stuff, or at least make plans to do a backup. And you know, I was mentioning G Drive and the Markiplier thing. There's a thing in the GUI in the Synology. So if you have G Suite for Business and you need to back up your company's Google Mail and Drive and all that crap, you can. You just plug in your credentials in the G Suite backup, or set up an account that has backup permissions in your G Suite, plug it into your Synology, and then it will connect to your G Drive and pull everything down. Gmail, the calendar, files, the whole 9 yards. It's a pretty slick GUI. Point and click. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to do all this command line, paste a script, configure SSH, you know, SSH into the machine and do stuff. You don't have to do any of that. It's all point and click. If anything, it's an argument for, you know, making it as simple as possible to, like, looking at the stuff that I'm doing with Rsync, and it's like, well, I had a particular itch that required a particular scratch, and just because I went with a packaged appliance like a Synology, I didn't lose that functionality. So that's really awesome. So that's it in a nutshell. Or is it Z-Shell? Or Fish? No, it's in a nutshell on the Level 1 forum. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. It's World Backup Day. Manage your backups. Thanks to Synology for sponsoring this video. Definitely take a look at your backups if you have any questions about the setup or the particulars or anything like that. Let me know on the Level 1 forums. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.